Hello and welcome to Creighton in the Community Presents. My name is Joyce Bunger and I'll be your host. Creighton University Center for Health Policy and Ethics and the School of Nursing recently produced a documentary called Ethics in Nursing, the Foundation of the Profession. Today we're going to listen to that video and listen to the words of 28 trailblazers in the field of nursing ethics. With me today is Dr. Winifred Ellen Child Pinch. She's Professor Emerita with the School of Nursing at Creighton University and the Center for Health Policy and Ethics. Dr. Pinch, before we begin, I know you are a forerunner in the area of nurse ethics. How did your career evolve so that you became a nurse ethicist?
Well, every nurse, including myself, encounters troubling situations which require moral decision-making. And so when I was a faculty member at a college in New England, I audited the course that the students were taking in ethics, since I had never had a bioethics course as a student myself. And I realized that their study provided a great deal of knowledge and skills that would be important in trying to make ethical decision-making in their practice.
You say bioethics. Is that different than ethics, or is it a form of ethics?
Well, it's usually used to apply to the situations that arise in healthcare. Some people say healthcare ethics, some people say biomedical ethics, some people say bioethics.
I see.
They're all kind of the same.
Thank you.
So as a result of that experience, I decided to focus on ethics in my doctoral program. However, this was the mid-70s, and there was no such thing as a master's in bioethics or a doctorate in ethics that is applied to healthcare. So, like many others in that same situation in the 70s, I devised my own program and studied it over the course of the 6+ years it took me to finish my doctorate.
Mm-hmm. And now, in terms of a nurse ethicist, your role is what? What do the nurse ethicists do? How are you different than another nurse?
Well, I think all nurses have a fundamental knowledge of ethics. They might bring that to their situation from formal study or from simply other experiences in life. But I think that the nurse ethicist has special skills and additional knowledge that they bring, either through a formal program or through self-study. Mm-hmm. And that enables them, I think, to become the faculty member who teaches the dedicated course on bioethics, or to be the clinical expert working in a hospital or agency where they are called upon for consultation in difficult cases. They might serve on the ethics committee, and they might also provide education to staff and other individuals in their setting.
Now, you have written a book called When the Bow Breaks. Tell us about that book and how you got to publishing the book.
Well, one of the things I studied, of course, in my doctoral program were ethical dilemmas in the neonatal intensive unit, NICU for short. And when I first began my role at Creighton at the School of Nursing, I was in community health. We had our own home health care agency at that time. And one of the assignments I had was to do follow-up with families as their infants were discharged from the NICU. So when I went to make these visits, I carried on conversations with the parents and discovered that their perception of their situation in the hospital was not what I understood to be the situation from my reading in my doctoral program. So I thought about this for a while, consulted with colleagues, and decided that it was worth focusing a research study in this area. So I was fortunate to get funding and be able to investigate this in detail. I interviewed families while the baby was in the NICU, as well as 6 months post-discharge and 4 years post-discharge. And the accumulation of all the information I got, plus some theoretical work related to that, are all in the book When the Bow Breaks.
What were the ethical dilemmas?
Interestingly enough, parents could not define that they were really involved in ethical decision making in the hospital.
Like what would be some of those decisions?
Well, how aggressive to be in terms of treatment, when to go to palliative care instead of aggressive care.
And palliative care is?
No aggressive treatment, simply comfort care.
Comfort care.
Caring, making sure the individual's not in pain, and providing all of the things that you would need to live but not be aggressive with medical interventions. They felt disenfranchised in general from decision making in that situation. And they also felt vulnerable in terms of making any confrontation because the staff, after all, had the babies' lives in their hands, and they didn't want to, raise any kind of trouble that would impact the care of their infant. But when they got home, they realized that this was now their responsibility, and that perhaps they should have been more involved. Now, I want to make it clear that it wasn't that they weren't informed, because there is extremely detailed documentation of teaching that went on while the baby was in the hospital. But, they were stressed. They might not have heard it. They might not have understood. So that changes, I thought, needed to be made in the way parents were informed and the kind of
like what
materials.
changes? I guess what I'm looking for here is, for our listener, is what are some of those rights, perhaps, or some changes that if you are in a situation with a loved one or yourself, that you do have, that things have changed that you can do?
One of the things that parents noticed is that they were sometimes told information while standing around the baby's isolette. They preferred someplace private, because the way the nursery was set up at that time is all the babies were in one room, and you could overhear families talking with the professionals at another isolette. So they wanted to go off to someplace private. The other thing is that they needed to hear the information more than once. So that written materials, videotapes, audio tapes were all important for them to have, which they did not feel that they got at that particular time. But changes have been made in the NICU, and some of those things have occurred since I did my research in the 80s.
Let's turn now to the Legacy Project. And I think that's just a nickname, or was it called the Legacy Project? What spurred the project, and what was the actual name of the project, or was it the Legacy Project?
Well, it takes too much time to say the whole name every
right.
time we wanted to
All right.
refer to it, so it's a shortened term. It's a nickname. But Dr. Amy Haddon and I had always wanted to do an nursing ethics project. And so after I retired from the School of Nursing, this was in the spring of 2005, she asked if I would be interested in working part-time at the center and carrying on this dedicated project. We were looking at nursing and healthcare ethics, the legacy and the vision. So we wanted to bring nursing ethics experts to Omaha for a working seminar in which they would discuss their work with other experts in the field. Having already written an essay looking at their own work, the legacy, and then its impact on the future of healthcare.
I suspect there was, who were the older ones? I guess if I'm asking who, and I don't mean by old by age, I mean who were the long-term nurse ethicists, and what did they bring?
Well, actually by age, one of our oldest was Sister Simone Roach, who was in her 80s when she came for the seminar. But there were other scholars who also began their career in this area in the 1970s. Ann Davis, Myla Roskar, Sarah Fry, and these were all people that we wanted to have involved in our project, and who in fact were involved in our project.
Of the 28 that were interviewed, were there 2 or 3, in your opinion, that were most memorable?
They were all special in different ways. It's hard to pinpoint one, but several stand out in my mind. Dr. Joyce Thompson, for one, whose work with women and her international influence is outstanding. Other individuals include Leah Creighton, who is a very outstanding spokesman and advocate for the problems and areas of troubling areas in ethics. And again, Dr. Mila Roskar, who is a very careful and thoughtful scholar.
What will future nurses learn from this video?
I think it is a unique opportunity to have these individuals do a critical examination of their own work and then look at what this means for the general area of ethics in nursing. I think it's important to have this book available for courses. The video only came out last May, so I'm not quite sure exactly. The book's been used in courses, but the video we're not sure about yet, but hopefully it will accompany the book. It enables people not only to read what people say, but it also enables them to see how enthusiastic they are about their work, to hear their tone, and to look at their nonverbal communication as well. It really highlights the essays that are in the book.
My start in nursing is probably a bit unusual. I was a member of the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth, and I wanted to be a French teacher. And when they asked us what we wanted to do, I said I wanted to teach French, and they said, how about nursing? And at a time when nobody spoke back, I said I had better choose nursing. And it was a match made in heaven.
If you're the firstborn Catholic girl in the 60s, what do you do besides be a teacher and a nurse? And although my father had been to the university, there weren't a lot of role models at the time. So I am passionately committed to the work of nursing and those who do it.
Well, at the time that I started to formally study ethics, this had to be 1978. My challenge was, once I was admitted into a doctoral program in philosophy with a focus on biomedical ethics, was to be taken seriously.
I grew up in the Second World War. I was 10 years old and 2 days when the United States went to the Second World War. When I first went into psych nursing, they hadn't developed the psychotropic drugs. And there was a lot of electric shock and a lot of admitting patients involuntarily. I witnessed clinically a lot of things that led me to ask questions, why are we doing this? Should we be doing this? That was a real turning point for me. I had been interested in sort of a vague, generalized way, but then I really focused in on ethics, and it became my career.
And seeing the effects of poverty on people, and why this had to be, seeing children die because we couldn't even get a shot of penicillin for them. This was before Medicare or Medicaid. It was a rude awakening. That certainly was one of the things that led me to study ethics. Also, other things that I saw in the hospital and so on. I didn't understand why things should be that way. So I started going to one of the very few ethics seminars that was available at the time was from the Hastings Center. And I went to their seminars, which were all focused on death and dying at the time, and I thought, good Lord, I'm much more worried about the living at the moment.
I think like most nurses, I thought I was going to just take care of patients all my life. You know. And then I did that and loved it. It was the 1950s, 1957. I began nursing school, and that was a very conventional kind of social time, you know, that before the feminist movement, et cetera, and people didn't question, and above all nurses, and so you were very subservient and obedient.
I thought all you had to do to be a good nurse was to read doctor's orders. And sorry to say, I'm not sure we've come that far.
Nurses perceived that doctors, you know, would somehow gain retribution or scream at them or yell at them or whatever. People that I would work with would see injustices and being done to patients and treated shabbily or whatever, and they wouldn't speak up, you know, to doctors or to the hospital administration about the conditions or whatever, because they were afraid to speak up, and I just didn't quite understand that. And so that got me into my research in the doctoral program of really looking at nurses and studying their ethical reasoning and why they make certain choices.
I was working on a floor that was a surgical oncology floor, so we saw a lot of patients that were people who had cancer. We'd have discussions about end-of-life issues, end-of-life decision-making, but those were the days when physicians felt like you had to protect patients from the truth. In one case, a woman knew clearly what she wanted at the end of life. There was no advance directive at the time. She didn't have orders written that were consistent with her wishes. We had the physician come in to talk to her, and he got upset that I had brought these issues up. She, in the meantime, tried writing her wishes out on a napkin to, you know, do you think this would be good enough? Which I thought was really ridiculous, that you get to the point of having people be worried that they're not going to have their wishes followed.
I really thought I would stay at the bedside. It was the way patients were being treated that really bothered me. Kinds of decisions that were sort of being made for people rather than with people. There was something about where I was and my values that said this was not where I needed to stay unless I could make a change.
We analyzed audio tapes of physicians and neonatal nurse practitioners talking to parents about their extremely premature infants' medical condition, treatment options, and the prognoses. And those conversations were so inadequate from my perspective and so adequate from the perspective of the healthcare providers.
I turned my attention to ethics because I saw so many instances when healthcare wasn't working for people who needed it. A dear friend who at the age of 39 was diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer and spent 2 of the hardest years of dying that I've ever witnessed. She looked like a Holocaust victim when she died. She had intestinal obstructions, she had surgery, she was in and out of the hospital. I can remember just spending an hour sitting behind her physically to give her strength while she retched over an amethyst basin. And she said, "Carol, please tell your students, when I first got sick, it didn't matter how people treated me because I knew who I was." She was president of a college. She had a PhD in biology. She was from Worcester, Massachusetts, had that delightful sense of New England privacy and reserve. She was one of the most gentle, loving human beings I've ever had the good grace and fortune to know. She said, "As I've grown weaker, I become whomever people make me." And she said, if a nurse or a doctor walks into my room and moves me like meat, I become meat. And I wanted to cry that I remember my profession had the capacity to take a Lillian and transform her to a slab of meat on a platter.
You can't pay me to care about you. You can't pay me to be compassionate. I have to want to do that. So you can pay me to provide services to you, but whether I smile, whether I touch gently, whether I embrace your needs, has to come from me. And so I think one of the greatest things that has to happen in our system is for individuals, person by person, taking responsibility for what it means to truly care about another person. Not for them, about them. That's what it means to be an ethical being. think the greatest surprise for me in my journey in ethics and in human rights has been my own limitations. My own culturally induced views of what the world was like. To come to realize that my colleagues in resource-poor nations are not disadvantaged when it comes to brain power. They're only disadvantaged when it comes to trying to do the impossible with nothing. And so what I had to do is to step back and say, wow, what I can learn from these people who are resource poor, but spiritually and intellectually rich, and probably challenged and more accustomed to doing the impossible with next to nothing than I ever was living in a resource-rich nation.
I think part of the difficulty for me has been that I see nursing as such a rich, powerful profession, and yet many of my colleagues don't.
Nurses need to be more empowered in healthcare environments to be able to make judgments and to practice the way they are taught in nursing school. There are too many distractions, too many other powerful players who are concerned with money, who are concerned with power, that gets in the way of the nurse really being able to practice according to the tenets of their judgment.
I really see that we need to change our environment so that, nursing staff, healthcare staff can be supported, that you build this into the notion of a plan of care, that there are sit-down appointments. Have you ever had a sit-down appointment with a physician when you've got a loved one in an intensive care unit? Duh. Does not happen because the institutions don't value that.
Very little, if anything, obscures a physician from acting in an ethical manner. They are viewed as essentially autonomous, fairly free to make decisions they believe to be right. And I can't see an obstruction there. When it comes to nurses, there are so many obstructions. But I would say the chief one is probably an inherent belief that you can't do something, or you can't make a difference.
I think what's surprising and a little bit disappointing is that some of the same issues that I was struggling with 20 years ago are still here. Who's in charge? Who has the authority to make decisions? Those issues are still with us.
We have to be willing to look at hierarchies of power and privilege, how responsibilities are distributed between and among groups, who has the power to deflect their responsibilities, who must accept them, what are the moral costs in terms of one's integrity, network of relationships, values. And I think there has to be a discussion that says we need a fairer distribution of these than there has been to date. And I'm not too optimistic at the moment.
We've talked about teamwork ever since I was a student. So I graduated with my beginning degree in 1975. And at that time, we talked so much about working as a team. And I don't think we've still done it. And I don't know that that's ever going to happen unless there is genuine, and I'm going to emphasize that word, genuine respect for each other's contributions to what the team needs to accomplish in mutually agreeable goals of care. You have to know what everybody else's job is so that you can do your own. And I think that's where we lack a lot of insight, is into what others really contribute to the team. Nurses are not the only people on the team who really care for the patient. It's not fair for us to act like we're the only ones who do that.
Hospitals and institutions exist because there is a patient who has a healthcare need. So the patient has to be centered. So if we have a different environment where the nurse and the physician are respected members of the healthcare team and we put the patient first, we really put the patient first, We would all be part of a team that would be helping the patient. And nurses would be respected as essential members of the healthcare team.
Using things like the standards for a healthy work environment and actually implementing them and holding people accountable for that. And then creating policies and support systems and structures that will actually support nurses most fully, so that they can take what they know within themselves and trust it and be able to stand firm on it and speak on behalf of patients and families and the profession with strong voice and clear voice.
In some areas we've made pretty good strides with physicians. That was the first big problem. But I think just relationships with other healthcare professionals and the system itself. And in this day and age with HMOs and insurance calling the shots, and it makes nursing very difficult.
I think in small ways it is being done in areas, in departments, in units where good teams are working together to make changes. But the broad situation is not good news.
Almost everyone I met really wanted to do the right thing. The problem is most of our choices deal with a choice between equally unfavorable alternatives. That's the nicest way to say it. Or you can say a wrong and a wrong, so which is the lesser wrong? No matter what you do, things aren't going to turn out the way you hope they will.
It's not being able to care for people the way you know they ought to be cared for. And that's so generalizable. It's what most nurses today are saying. The reason why some nurses come out of nursing.
Issues like serving as the patient's advocate become meaningless in an environment in which there's no time to talk with patients and there's no opportunity to get to know patients in any depth whatsoever.
I may not have much time to spend with you, but if I spend that time focused on you, listening to you, observing, I can do a lot. If I spend that time talking to a colleague, distracted with my own thoughts, then I've cheated you. People think about the issues. Where are you on abortion? Where are you on euthanasia? Well, actually, those are our own opinions, probably well-informed ones, but opinions. But when it comes to what is my obligation to you, then we're talking the ethics of a profession.
Many of you know Creighton University Medical Center is an outstanding hospital, but there's more to it than that. For instance, we're only one of 12 hospitals in the country accredited to perform transfusion-free open-heart surgeries. We see patients from all over the world who come to Creighton for our highly specialized cancer surgery. We also conduct world-renowned research. In fact, Creighton doctors discovered the link between calcium and osteoporosis. We're home to one of Nebraska's busiest trauma centers, with critically injured patients flown here from across the region. In short, we care for some of the area's sickest patients and most complex injuries, all while conducting groundbreaking research and teaching the next generation of medical professionals. So it's easy to see why people say we're more than just a hospital. We're Creighton University Medical Center.
When you go to class at Creighton's College of Business, you will not be taught by a graduate student, but by a real professor. Our faculty members have received Fulbright fellowships, been named scholars in residence at the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Congressional Budget Office, and many sit on the boards and act as consultants for Fortune 500 companies. The bottom line, they bring a wealth of applied knowledge to their areas of expertise, and many are regularly quoted in Business Week, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. This kind of real-world experience is highly prized in the College of Business. We take it so seriously that each semester, through our Real Returns program, over 100 business professionals joined Creighton students in the classroom as guest professors.
What needs to develop more in healthcare is a greater emphasis or greater weight upon what I call the meaning and value structures of healthcare, as opposed to the power structures, which include all of the economics of healthcare, which overwhelm, I think, some of the value concerns we have. I'd like to reclaim the patient as the center, and not just the patient, but the whole person. Patient as the center of healthcare, so that patients aren't cattle in the chute, and patients aren't suffering from enormous disparities in healthcare, and patients aren't the 3-minute in the office visit, that sort of thing, so that we reclaim relationships within healthcare, and that persons are treated as persons.
America right now does not have a value, an ethics value, that allows us to really move conversations forward. And it's a value that's all through Europe. It's all through most cultures in the world. We are the only industrialized nation in the world that does not have universal health care, save one, South Africa. And the value that is missing is a value that is oftentimes called solidarity. How is it that we in America, we have no value where I would say, it harms me that you don't have it as good as I do? And that's the value missing in America.
I definitely think that our healthcare system is extremely broken, and I think that we won't really move toward a fairer or more just healthcare system until we address healthcare access issues and healthcare rationing head-on.
I was at the Carter Institute, and one of their reports was on worldwide AIDS. Money is not the question, because what we spend on the war in Iraq in 2 weeks would pay for worldwide health care of every single individual with AIDS. It's so incredible.
We are burying our heads in the sand when we address issues of cost. We think that it should have nothing to do with healthcare decisions at the bedside. That's a luxury. We spend, more than twice what the other industrialized countries spend per person on healthcare. We have poorer outcomes, and we're rationing all the time.
And of course, we ration by the fact that how many percentage don't have access to health care. They don't have any health insurance. That's a type of rationing. And people, I think, have been sold a bill of goods about, well, we won't have any choices. Well, that's nonsense. Of course you have choices. The system is so sick in this country. I mean, I feel like I've stepped back into the dark ages.
I have a fundamental concern around people making money off of people's suffering. I've always had a problem with that, always had a problem. I mean, that's what at least some parts of healthcare are about, is treating, helping, supporting suffering people. And I think that as a society, there's a fundamental problem with making money on people's suffering.
I think that we're selfish, and we need to look beyond. And I think it's the role of ethics to promote looking beyond.
My most difficult challenge is my passion for the next generation of nurses, because it's brutal out there, and I'm furious with academic nursing. I think we have really let students down in many, many ways.
As an educator, do you teach the way you believe nurses ought to be taught and learn, or do you teach them for the situations they're going to get into, meaning the system? And of course, none of us wants to choose the latter.
I think one of the challenges that I found is trying to impress upon others how important ethics is in a nursing curriculum. I truly believe that ethics should be taught as an interdisciplinary course. I think a lot of the ethics issues that nurses face today are because we can't communicate well. We think we do, we try our best, but it doesn't work.
Genuine respect will only come if we start knowing more about what everybody contributes. And that probably means, unfortunately, that we reconfigure the way that we educate health science students. Because it's too late when you get into the clinical setting to try and figure out what everybody else is doing.
I thought it might be easier to go back to the start, to educate nursing students and train them right, not have to, try to get them to change their ways later on in life. And so that led me into the academic world.
I knew every spring that we graduated students who were intelligent enough to pass the licensing exam and clever enough to get through a clinical rotation. But once they were out without supervision, I wouldn't necessarily trust them to be who patients and families needed. And that was the old can virtue be taught question. And I thought there's got to be a better way to graduate not only a clinically competent healthcare professional, but somebody who was not only compassionate, but accountable, responsible.
Ethics is so integrally woven into the practice of nursing that I don't like to see it treated as something separate and special. It should be part and parcel of the education. Everything, in my view, is guided by ethical consideration.
My ongoing challenge is the work in the world with women and human rights. And that is to realize that 99% of the world views women and children as discardable, as objects, as people who shouldn't have voices, who should be kept silent, who should be seen and not heard, and how difficult it is throughout the world to change that view. Starting with the women themselves, because very often we contribute to that view. We acquiesce. We try not to rock the boat, and yet, from a moral perspective, I want to be treated as a human being. And if I want to be treated as a human being, and as I teach my students the same, if you want to be treated as a human being with full human rights, then you have to demand those rights, and you have to act as if you deserve those rights.
Nursing has not invested in ethics scholars, but they want people at the ethics table. So the biggest challenge I've had is to help my nursing colleagues to see that if we want people at the table, that means we have to honor the work they do in ethics. They need to be ethics researchers. They need to teach ethics. They need to write in ethics. They need their work and their scholarship to be in ethics. And then they don't have to ask for a place at the table. They're invited to the table.
The Good Nurse.
A good nurse kisses her patients when she says goodnight. Elie Wiesel. Our kiss is in gratitude for rumpled sheets, the hourly turning of patients, for pillows placed between legs, cotton booties pulled over raw heels, and in thanksgiving for the patient's needs, their thirst quelled by our cold glass, their pain sharp and relentless as a bee, charmed by our fingertips. The kiss has everything to do with sons who look at us and disappear, daughters who line their eyes with blue and borrow our too loud laughter. We want to bind them in our arms. Instead, we tend the patient who longs for us. He knows we will rush to him, stroking his earlobe, kissing lightly his eyelid, his cheek. Not for love, but for what is constant, the way skin hurries to bruise and the last gaze freezes the mind.
Nurses are key members of the healthcare team. Are student nurses taught to be ethical? Joining me is Dr. Helen Stanton Chappell. She's an assistant professor at the School of Nursing at Creighton University and is also affiliated with Creighton University's Center for Health Policy and Ethics. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your career.
Well, I was a nurse at the bedside for about 20 years, before I came to Creighton about 3 years ago. And during that time, I got a couple of degrees from the University of Virginia. One was in ethics, and the other was in medical anthropology. I started out as a hospice volunteer before I went into nursing. My major interest has been most recently, is how dying occurs in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So,
how did ethics? What sparked your interest in ethics that you wanted to proceed in that area?
Along the way, I became very interested in the decision making that happens around patients who are severely ill, and I felt that I felt strongly enough about it that I thought I better get a credential, and so that was available at the University of Virginia.
You're instrumental in helping craft the curriculum for the student nurses at Creighton University. Can you teach ethics? Or how do you teach ethics, I guess is a better question.
You know, it's interesting to notice the difference between morality, which we all seem to think we know, and ethics. Morality might be the difference between right and wrong, but ethics is going to be the difference between two rights. So if, for instance, a physician recommends a treatment and a patient refuses, both of them may be right. But which one should take precedence? So ethics is trying to talk to us and help us understand how to make those decisions and why one right might take precedence over another.
Do nurses often act as the facilitator then to helping the families understand the different issues?
They may. It really depends on the relationship and what's going on. The decision makers in the clinical situation are going to be the physicians and the family. The nurses are sort of the Greek chorus. Sometimes I think about them as sort of commenting on what's going on, but not without a lot of power.
Really?
In the situation. Right.
So in the curriculum, do you help the students understand the role that the nurses should play?
Absolutely. That even if they are not having a lot of power, they certainly have a voice, and they need to be using that voice. It's interesting that physicians are taught all the time how to talk in a clinical situation, but nurses generally are not given that opportunity.
Well, give me some examples of ethical dilemmas that nurses encounter.
Nurses are very close to their patients and the populations that they serve, and what they see, they witness a lot of suffering, they witness a lot of injustice, but as I said, they're not decision makers, so that they don't have the ultimate authority to change what they're seeing. So that causes them a lot of suffering in a sense themselves. They have to answer to a number of different
entities, not only patient and family in a sense and the physicians, but also administration, to their colleagues, and to the profession itself. So there's a lot of tension involved in the position that they hold, and they need to learn how to negotiate that so that they don't get burned out and feel like they need to leave the profession because there's so much going on that they may feel that they can't influence.
All right, I'm thinking in visiting with Dr. Pinch, I know about the ethics of the NICU, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. I know of ethics as it applies to right to live and die. What are some other ethical situations that I may encounter with either myself or my family?
Are you thinking in terms of your own, if you're thinking in terms of your own care or your own family's care, that's a very typical way to think about ethics in the United States is about decision-making, autonomy, and choice. But in fact, especially here at Creighton, we're very, very concerned about social justice and the kinds of ethics that involve populations and underserved populations in particular. So nurses who are involved in public health, for instance, are very, very concerned with the populations that they serve. Again, it's wanting to give them more, wanting to get more, seeing ethical problems in a lack of solidarity, perhaps.
I see.
Serving those populations, so that we are sort of caught up in what we as Americans, schooled in self-reliance, get caught up in how we're going to be taken care of, rather than thinking about how it benefits us, in fact, if an entire population is healthy.
Oh, that's very interesting. I understand you've written a book called No Place for Dying. Tell me a little bit about your book.
The book, the entire title is No Place for Dying, Hospitals and the Ideology of Rescue. So I was very interested in how, as I say, how dying actually occurs. The decision making, yes, but more importantly, how patients actually die in the hospital. So I interviewed clinicians, nurses, physicians, respiratory therapists who had taken care of a patient who had died recently. And that formed the basis for my book. And it's in two different hospitals that I did my research, a Catholic community hospital and a teaching hospital, to wonder about the kinds of pressures that the hospitals and the clinicians are under as they deal with making these decisions, and also as they deal with patients who are dying. It's very difficult for them to actually designate a person as dying, because rescue is so important to us for many reasons, and important to our self-identity. And we see it as an egalitarian thing to offer to patients. So that to say that you're no longer someone who's qualified to be rescued, who's eligible to be rescued, takes a great deal of effort on our part. We have to, I call it the ritual of intensification that we have to go through.
Where's the family in this process?
Well, the family's a big important part of it, because oftentimes by the time the patient is to this point, that severely ill, often they can't participate themselves. They're too sick. So oftentimes it's the family that's involved, so that the team may come to a decision to say that a patient is no longer surviving, likely to survive. They would go to the family. The family would then either endorse or not endorse that decision. Often that's the way it works. But once the patient is designated as dying, they sort of become a second-class citizen in the hospital. Not to say they don't get good care, especially if they are able to get seen by palliative care, if that's available for them in the hospital. But the whole system doesn't see dying as a legitimate category. It makes it sort of second class, as I say.
How can families avoid discord at the hospital? I'm thinking about, what if a family member is dying of cancer, and there's heroic efforts that can be taken, and part of the family really feels that they want this to be implemented, and the other part of the family says, no, let mom go. How can families avoid situations like that at a loved one's bedside?
Well, of course, your ideal is that this has all been talked about ahead of time and this is all settled. But in fact, that may not be the case. There may be estrangement in various family members, or they just don't want to talk about it ahead of time. But in fact, the thing that in real life situations, families are very, very stressed in these situations, and they're tired. Their schedules are disrupted, their lives are disrupted. It's a very, very stressful time. So clearly they want, what they would want to do is to access the resources in the hospital, the ethics resources, to help work through these situations. Communication is very, very important.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I have a personal situation I want to talk about. I have a very dear friend who is in a reoccurrence of cancer. One of the options to keep her alive is a very expensive drug, and there is some real, the doctors seem to be in this camp, and the insurance company seems to be in this camp, and even the family is somewhat fractured. Is this where a board of ethics comes in, or how do you all, how can a nurse maybe be instrumental in helping bringing them all to the table, or how does that mend?
There is a, you're asking several different
questions. I know
questions
I am,
there.
and I'm sorry, but I guess it just occurred to me that this is an ethical dilemma that's right in front of me today, that in talking to you, it occurred to me that you might have some insight.
Well, anytime, to frame it in a particular way, anytime that someone is unable to get the care that they need based on the decision made by someone else, you're talking about rationing. And rationing is a problem anytime, as I say, people can't get the care that they really need. Other countries besides the United States have figured out how to do this so that their citizens can get the care that they need, other industrialized countries. But if you're talking about, it's who has the power in the situation. The question is, who has the power to make the decision? And even if there are certain factions that have particular sides, have certain interests that they want to serve, you want to bring them together. If in this case the family, the insurance company is not going to be in the hospital, but if there is if there's a bedside dilemma, you would want to call the ethics committee, the ethics consult service, whoever might be there, to try to work through some of these issues, and that would work for your family who's having discord.
So that's an option. All hospitals have these.
Actually, they all do. The Joint Commission makes it a core requirement that there's a mechanism of some kind in every hospital that you can call. It may be an individual, it may be a committee, but there has to be a mechanism there.
I have one last question. Healthcare reform is on the minds of many, and we can think of the economic arguments, and I know there are also ethical arguments. What is Creighton University doing right now to facilitate further discussion?
We are, at the Center for Health Policy and Ethics, we're often bringing people together. We are trying to reach out also to people in the community and also other centers nationally to try to promote these conversations. And actually, during the healthcare debate, such as it might have been, I mean, there was a lot of talking going on, but a lot in the press was a lot of scare tactics. And that was unfortunate because, as I say, there's a very, very real argument to be made about the interdependence of people in society and the importance that whole populations in a nation can be healthy and how that can serve everyone in the population. So we have done roundtables. We have Richard O'Brien as an expert in health policy, and he's done many, many outreaches into the community in different venues to try to talk about these issues and help people understand more in depth that they needn't be scared of healthcare reform. It's going to help all of us.
Thank you, Dr. Chappell, and I'd also like to thank Dr. Pinch for visiting with us today. Ethics crosses through many levels of healthcare: death and dying, cancer, geriatrics, healthcare reform. We all have a voice, we all have a heart. Ethics blends the two. On behalf of all of us at Creighton University, thanks for watching.